Glen Rock, New Jersey.
Jersey, yeah. I've seen his videos. He's very engaging.
Lots of old, neat old stuff there.
Yeah, I like it. So what did you hear? Anything outstanding?
Didn't really listen. There were a ton of people there.
It's not good for that. Yeah.
No, it was a special invitation once a year. Like I said, cars and coffee, and Porsches show up and BMW M cars,
Yeah.
and people gab. Fremer
Yeah.
was there,
That's neat.
and I think his name is Tom Shirelli, who's the Griffin importer.
Did you hear the latest thing about BMW cars? They're having a recall because they're catching on fire.
That also includes some Toyotas
Yeah, the Supra.
because it's really a BMW
It's a BMW engine, yeah.
chassis too.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew the engine was.
They retune the chassis, and of course they do the body and the interior. But
Yeah.
it's, I think, I think it's made by this. It's subcontracted for BMW too in some place in Austria, and it's also some. I think the Supras are made there also. I think.
Ken, just before we start the meeting, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. I found some interesting things the AES is doing and some other stuff.
All right. Would that be good for open forum, do you think?
Yeah, open forum, but
Yeah.
that maybe toward the end of the open forum, I'll speak up.
Well, you find the right moment.
Okay.
Yeah, you think the chemistry is right. That's great. Thank you.
There's a very interesting AES meeting in the UK, but it's a Zoom meeting coming up on the 7th, and it's about discrepancies between measurements and perceptions in audio systems.
No?
It should be really good.
Yeah.
So if you're an AES member, I think, since it's a Zoom meeting, and because it's in the UK, it'll be 2 p.m, so it won't be running late at night.
Perfect. Yeah. They have very interesting programs. I went to their Bose tour. So
Ooh.
they organized with Bose a tour of their research facilities and some of their test systems and so on. And that was it was very gracious of Bose to do this. I had never been to their facility before. Uh, so I got to go to
There,
the code chamber in Framingham.
there were 2 Chicago section meetings I went to that were really interesting back in the day when I lived in the Chicago area. One of them was the guy who was in charge of all the cartridge development at Shure.
Oh wow.
And he went through the whole process of what it took to get the Ultra series, including the laminated pole pieces, the beryllium cantilever, the line contact stylus. I mean, he just went through everything.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. And the other one was a presentation where, oh my God, what's his name? I can't remember his name. He was one of the technical chief people at AES, came to the meeting and brought a cassette recorder with 2 tiny earphones that you put in your ears. And you did a recording on this cassette recorder. And then you put in some in-ear headphones like my audio, my Etymotic research. And the spaciousness was just unbelievable. And that was my first introduction to head-related transfer function.
Yeah.
And how HRTF does create this sense of space, because it was recorded actually in my ears.
Amazing.
It was those 2 meetings
This was a
still,
long time ago. Yeah.
oh, at least 40 years ago, but those 2 I remember distinctly compared to all the other meetings.
Yeah, that's shocking. Neat. Yeah, this Bose facility, they undoubtedly are doing these kinds of things because they're very serious about headphones and headphone research and technology and noise cancellation and all of that. And they also do a lot of car audio, so there's quite a bit associated with that. But the most memorable demo of the evening, honestly speaking, was where they took their sound bar and demonstrated how their sound correction made the sound bar sound pretty good, even though it was still in its shipping carton.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
I feel I have to talk about that in open forum. That was not an official demo. It was something that the engineer in the room was being a little cheeky to show us, but it was honestly the most impressive demo of the evening.
I have a two-part article coming out in Audio Express November and December,
Yeah.
and it's about all my impressions of the Danville DSP Nexus that I've
Oh,
had for a couple of years.
yeah.
And it does get into some of the things that where you can really improve the sound of a system. You can't make a bad system perfect, but you can improve the sound of a system dramatically with
Yeah.
DSP.
Yeah. Well, that was my experience with my big old JBLs, which of course excel in dynamic range and frequency response. They're really good at that, but they have some comb filter problems, and no one would use the kinds of dispersion fins that they had on them anymore. It's and even when they were built, they were from 1996, and even then they were an anachronism that they were included just because they represented a certain style of the speaker that people liked, but they were already using the butt cheeks at this point. It was ridiculous. Anyway, I like the speaker very much, so that's why I got them years ago. Well, if you add in the room correction, you can get some pretty nice refinements from the baseline performance those speakers have, and a lot of the complaints that people might throw at them disappear. And we have Perry Marshall. Welcome.
Yeah.
Hello, good
Yeah,
afternoon.
since we have Perry here now, let me just mention a couple things. Perry and I go back at least a couple of years, Perry, right? Like 40.
At least a
Yeah.
couple.
Okay.
I moved to Chicago 30 years ago, so that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I've been involved with speakers for a long time, but my first introduction really to the physics and the mechanics, excuse me, of drivers came from Perry. In fact, I still have a spreadsheet that I built based on some of the stuff he did. And through the years, I've always remembered what he said. I've, also had a lot of contact with Bill Duddleston, who's a phenomenal guy and very willing to help. Dave Clark, Wolfgang Klippel. In fact, I did an article back in 2003 in Audio Express comparing the Clark, the Dumax and the Klippel system.
I'm
But
sorry.
it all started with Perry.
All right. Hey,
So this should be a great presentation because Perry does know his stuff, and I was over at his house after Expona, and I did hear the speakers, and they're just a little bit good. they're very, very good.
maybe you should introduce Perry, because I've not had a chance to speak with him before today's meeting. And before I do an introduction, I like to you get a little bit more background. And it sounds like you've had more than a little, so you would be the better person to introduce him for the meeting. Would you do that, Tom?
Sure, I can do that. Just tell me when, and I'll
Yeah.
be my usual quiet, non-expressive type person.
Yeah, yeah. Just turn it up to 11. All right. But Perry, my apologies that I haven't reached out earlier. I'm Ken, and thank you very much for making the time this afternoon to join us and share this really interesting thing. And I did enough research to understand that the breadth of what you do. And yeah, wow, I only wish we had 6 or 7 hours to spend with you, and we could hear about maybe a couple more things, not all of them. But yeah, what a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you.
I've been really looking forward to this. I've been working on it for a couple months. I felt like I've never had a full shot at explaining my theory and philosophy of speaker design. I think this is not just an explanation about a technical project. It's also an exposition of how I think about audio and I have some frustrations with I think the industry has become very stagnant, and there's, for the most part, most companies aren't really doing anything particularly interesting. I think there's a few companies that are doing really interesting state-of-the-art things. And so I've stir-fried the viewpoints of a lot of people, like Tom mentioned several, like Dave Clark and Bill Duddleston and and people like that. And yeah, so I've stirred fried this into my own viewpoint of what makes a great sound system. I think it's going to be lots of fun.
Well, that's the best thing when we can understand the context of this and yeah, how you came to where you are. That's always fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, go deep, go hard. I can't wait.
Yeah. And how long do you want to go?
Oh yeah, so well, let me tell you about the structure of the meeting. We'll open in a minute or two after people arrive at the top of the hour, and we'll have an open forum section of the meeting, which goes for about 20 to 30 minutes, where people will share news or ask questions to the other members, and you should feel free to participate in that. But after people kind of wear themselves out, or I'm getting tired of it, I'll stop it, and we'll then switch over to you as our featured presentation. And that's normally I think about an hour. And if you would like to go on for longer than that, some people do. Members will hang out all afternoon and chatter away, and it's just great. But I don't want you to feel like you're obligated. So if you have some time for Q&A after that formal presentation, that's always the best part.
I have time for Q&A and more about you.
Oh, yeah. So I've been an audiophile for a long time, and I do have some engineering background in software, but I'm not in the audio industry personally. So I'm an enthusiast. And yeah, this past year have been president for the society.
Oh, great. Well, you isn't the society like 50 years old or something?
It's
How
crazy. Yeah, we might be the firstest and the oldest.
That's great. I've been hearing and reading about the Boston Audio Society since I was a teenager, reading in magazines. And
Yeah.
like I watched one of your videos and I saw Michael Riggs. Like, well, I used to read his articles in what, Stereo Review or something like that. And I mean, Boston's kind of the Grand Central Station of audio in the United States originally, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, there are of course a lot of very famous audio companies from Boston, but I think equally the membership is really keen in music too, which is
Mhm.
a good balancing point in all of this.
Yeah.
And I think also has a nice balance of interest in subjective as well as objective kinds of aspects to it all, and the tension between those and figuring these things out. It's always it's just it never stops astonishing me how many things I can continue to learn about this. Um, it's just when you think you've got it figured out, something confounds you again. So I just am amazed how many ways there are to skin this cat.
There are a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah, so it's endlessly fascinating, and it attracts a certain crowd, and I just enjoy the company very much. So we just want to keep it going.
All
Isn't that
right.
one of its virtues that we'll never hit perfection, so we never have to stop?
Yeah, I mean, there's that philosophy that when you reach perfection, why worry about it? But in my view, there's just all these versions of perfection, and they're all compelling. I mean, sometimes it's not quite as compelling as the others might be, but they yeah, there are all these different approaches that convey the pleasure of listening to music and then some. And that's pretty terrific. And I'm always interested in how people reach that place, because there's an evolution of experience and learning that brought them there. So anyway, that's my personal take. I've learned to have a big tent around this. I'm not a partisan of any one particular style.
Reverberate. What happened?
Special effects. So,
Okay.
someone must have joined with two open microphones.
Wow. It's the Hollywood Squares to figure out who it is. I'm in Evo.
It's not me. I just turned it off and it didn't go away.
So it's
No, it's someone who just joined a couple of minutes ago.
Loopy me, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it stopped. So whoever it was muted himself and that got better. Now he's back.
Yeah, it's me, apparently.
Who said me?
Al Southwick. I guess it's
Oh,
me.
hi, Al.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it
gone
sounds like
now.
you've got two mics somehow.
I just got a new laptop, so I could be guilty of just about anything. It took 10 or 15 minutes just to sign in.
Wow.
Oh well.
So much for Zooming. That's
You got to get secret codes from everywhere in your world.
I know it would like to send you a instant message. What's your phone number? Yeah.
Oh, no, it's probably asking your permission to use your microphone and use your camera as part of the privacy permissions.
That could be.
I don't.
Made it.
Anybody
I'm in a
worried
s-
about the flying saucer?
The what?
The flying saucer. I mean,
It's-
we're at the cusp of history. We're about to be visited by aliens. It's right out of the day the Earth stood still. The Earth is
Yes.
about to stand still.
That's just at your house, Richard.
What?
What are we doing?
That's just at your house.
Platu barata nito.
We came to the wrong Zoom meeting, I'm afraid.
Well, I think audio. We've always been audio is science fiction as far as I'm concerned. It started off with just a cone and a cylinder, and it was all acoustic. And we're living in a world now where you get high fidelity audio on your wristwatch.
Yes.
If you call that high fidelity.
Well, you have to put it into your headphones from the watch, but we're living in a science fiction world, and we have a post-apocalyptic president.
But back to the flying saucers. Is this something you saw or read?
Oh, you're not aware of Three Eye Atlas and the swan boat that's following it?
No,
Well,
I'm not aware.
well, then you're bliss. Continue living in bliss. The rest of it, but I just hope that they like audio. That's all. It'd be great if they made some progress, and in audio reproduction in the next million years that they're ahead of us.
All right. I don't want to break up the party here, but let me kick off.
Go ahead. I'm just.
We have an open forum, and this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
Let me start the meeting by welcoming members and guests. I see we have a few new faces here, which is terrific, for a very interesting presentation today from Perry Marshall, who's going to talk about his award-winning speakers. And I'd like Tom actually to do the introduction because I think Tom and Perry go way back. Isn't that right, Tom?
Yeah, further back than I'd like to admit, but so far I'm still kicking. I think we probably go back at least 30 years, maybe longer than that. I used to live in the Chicago area, and Perry moved into the Chicago area. And Perry was my first mentor when it came to really understanding dynamic drivers. He worked at Jensen and was designing drivers for various companies. And I was just mentioning that I still have a spreadsheet that I use to determine different characteristics based on what Perry taught me. Along the way, I also, learned from other people like Bill Duddleston, Dave Clark, Wolfgang Klippel, but Perry was the beginning of it all. And he is an interesting guy because he's certainly very competent technically, but he also is very competent in terms of being worldly and understanding how the technology fits into the world. And that's a very interesting combination. So I can tell you that I have heard those speakers when I was at Expona this year. I stopped by Perry's house. He was gracious enough to play a bunch of stuff that I wanted to hear. And his approach is different than my approach, but in terms of all the major characteristics like dynamic range, transient response, low distortion, and everything. His system is equal to mine. Mine is a little different in some areas. That's just personal taste. But I left saying, you know, Perry, I think probably 90% of the people in the world would kill to have the sound from your speakers. So that's how I'd like to introduce Perry as a good technical guy and a good guy in general. Along the way, by the way, of measurements and listening, I just want to mention there is an AES Zoom meeting coming up on the 7th of October. It's the UK chapter, and their topic is discrepancies between measurements and perceived sound in acoustic systems. So I would suggest you go out and sign up for that. Costs nothing. Should be a good presentation. Oh, one other thing. I am in the middle of a project right now for which I will probably not escape alive, because what I'm doing is I am comparing vinyl to digital sound.
Ah!
And the goal is not to say which one is better. I've had a philosophy for a long time that I don't care what the technology is, vinyl, digital, tube, solid state. If you do it right, it's going to sound good. And the key is doing it right. So what I've been doing for the past month and a half, and I'm going to be continuing for another month, is I've had people coming in, and if you've been here, you know this is a very high resolution system. And I have certain vinyl LPs, like I've got the music in me, that direct to disc from Sheffield, and I've got it on digital, and I've got some others. And what I do is I exactly balance the levels, and I have people come in one person at a time, and I compare the digital playback to the vinyl playback. And so far, and I ask people to assign a figure of not merit, but a figure of commonplace, or not commonplace. What do I call it? Correlation. A figure of correlation in percent, from 0, where you can't even tell it's the same music, to 100%, where you can't tell any difference. And so far, the scores for correlation have run from 95% to 100%.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you use ABX comparison?
Do not do that, and it wouldn't work, because when you're working with vinyl, you got all the surface noise and pops and stuff. I am relying on the people that are running the test to be fair and honest. And again, it is
Whoa!
yeah, I know. I've been doing ABX comparisons my whole life, but it's not possible to do that with this because of the surface noise on the vinyl. But I can tell you that the people seem to be fairly honest about it. And like I say, the lowest correlation was 95%, the highest was 100%. And when I get all through this, I'll be writing it up for Audio Express, of course.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for that, Tom. This is then, of course, our open forum section. And for our guests, what we do is start meetings with 20 or 30 minutes of announcements or questions to the group, and then we'll switch over to our featured speaker. So yeah, that looks like it's ready to go. But yeah, anything along the lines of what Tom was talking about with AES? Anyone want to share some notes?
I mean, I'm a proponent of multi-speaker systems. I have they've used Lexicon, surround sound, and Odyssey is another software, and I have found that some of the best sound, most interesting musical sound, is mono from the 1950s, played back through a multi-channel system that introduces time delay, and that produces a very beautiful image to listen to, that you can sit anywhere in the room. So I'm looking forward to having, and I owned KLH9s for a long time, so I lived with Dipoles before I gave up on them. So I'm looking forward very much to being proven wrong, and I'll have to go out and buy a whole new thing.
I'd like to mention one thing about mono through multiple speakers and using delays and stuff to get the sense of surround. One of the things that you need to do if you're using a vinyl playback system
Oh yeah.
is you have to try to find a cartridge that has the least amount of phase problems. Because if you have phase problems in the cartridge, it's going to introduce a sense of space, which is not on the vinyl. The cartridge I'm using in this comparison is my Shure Ultra 500. And I was at a Chicago AES section meeting. I mentioned that to you, Ken, earlier. And they discussed on how they designed that cartridge, not to be a beautiful flowery cartridge, but to get as much information off the vinyl pressing as they could. And what I did back in those days, I had cartridges from everybody, Dynavector, Denon, Grado, you name it, everybody. And one of the tests I did is I took the mono record and I used the stereo cartridge. I put the left channel on the X, the right channel on the Y, and did an XY comparison. And if there's no phase shift in the cartridge, you should have a straight line at 45 degrees. The only cartridge that came close to that, and all the ones I had, was the Ultra 500. And I repeated it again the other day, and it's still giving that straight line at 45 degrees. So as far as being accurate, not necessarily what you like, not necessarily, flowery and putting more space in, as far as being accurate, it is an incredibly accurate cartridge. And if you take mono, as Rich was talking about, you can put phase changes in and go to multiple speakers and get a sense of space. Wonderful, could sound great, but if you're trying to find out what really is on the digital file or on the vinyl record, you don't want a lot of phase shifts.
No.
Tom, I just want to congratulate you of taking phase into account. I produced a record, the Carver test record, 100 years ago, which pointed that out. In other words, cartridges, by definition, vary in their ability to reproduce phase, which adds a kind of spaciousness that cartridges do more than CDs. So I'm pleased that you took that into account.
Yeah,
I wonder if the way that you could correct for that is to just the output in mono rather than stereo.
Yeah, it would cancel out you have weird cancellations if they're out of phase, left and right channels.
If you're trying to reproduce accuracy, you want the minimum amount of phase shifts no matter what mechanism you're using. Once you start getting phase shifts, I had a long discussion with my good friend Dave Burning one time, who makes high-end vacuum tube amps, and we were talking about phase shifts and everything. And he does not use output transformers. He uses that what does he call it? The Zodal.
Yeah.
Zodal. And basically, what he said is when you have phase shifts, like in a transformer, you try to correct for it, and you might get a violin to sound right, but then the bassoon doesn't sound right. And you may get the drum to sound right, but then the trumpet doesn't sound right. So all these little tweaks and doodads people do to try to work with phase problems generally does not work. If you've got a phase problem, you got a problem.
I want to interject that Richard's processing of the signal generates reverberation. It's not just simple time delays.
And I'm experimenting still after living in this room for 30 years. I'm experimenting still with what's the best way to make it sound good on the most material from the most positions in the room. I have tomorrow night, if anybody's in the Boston area, I ended last Monday of the month music salon where
Not to be
get
missed.
together. Huh?
Not to be missed.
Not to be missed.
This is a highlight of every month. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I've been doing it since somewhere in the 70s, I think. So it's been quite a long run. And we listen to music, and we watch video a little bit. God forbid. but I'm looking forward to learning from Perry, you know, what I don't know. But because I really love, I love being immersed in the sound. I bought an Apple Vision Pro. I don't know if anybody has bought that or used the Apple Vision Pro. It's not ready for prime time. It's very difficult. It's very awkward to use. But the immersion that you get from things that are set up to play on the Apple Vision Pro is breathtaking. It's science fiction. It's breathtaking. And music and the Apple Vision Pro has wonderful little speakers in it. Actually, it has very good sound. Tom Holman designed. So anyway, there's lots to say.
Quick,
So I have an experience to share. I went to Bose's headquarters last week for the first time. So AES had organized a Bose tour of their R&D facility. We got to go into some of their test rooms, including their anechoic chamber, which was interesting, and in this very odd room that had been set up on its side, and it wasn't 100% clear why they had a living room on its side where all the furniture was on the wall and you were standing on a sidewall. But anyway, they had a lot of investment in trying to test systems in what they thought were going to be good simulations of consumers' rooms. But by far the best demonstration was one that was not official. I think it was kind of a cheeky test engineer had set this up. He wanted to show us how effective the room correction system was for their soundbar technology. So these are the long, squat speakers that go under the TV, flat TV screen. And so he showed us how good it could sound even when it was still in its shipping carton. And to tell you the truth, it sounded really good. Spacious.
Well, did they plug it into anything?
Yeah, I plugged it into music. So he actually ran music through the soundbar speaker when it was still in its carton. And it sounded all right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was going to win any awards, but it's much better with the sound correction on than with it off. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
we all try that. Put a box around our speakers.
Was it better with the carton on?
With the carton on, it was a little boxy.
Of course.
My wife has been saying I should probably put a box around my head.
Oh,
By the way, speaking of
if it's air conditioned, it's not a bad idea.
speaking of spatial sound, I heard a demonstration of a system by the company Audio Scenic. They're a UK company, and they are doing crosstalk cancellation similar to what is being done in the box system, only they're aimed at a different market. They're aimed at gamers. And they have a little sound bar that goes in front of your computer screen, and they have some processing. And I went down to one of their stores and I heard it. Not going to replace my system as far as fidelity, but in terms of creating a large spatial image, it was pretty amazing.
What's it called?
Audio Scenic. It's a company from the UK. And like I said, they're not involved in high-end audio. It's a real business, the gamers.
Mm-hmm. That's depressing.
So actually, I had a fascinating discussion with one of the Bose people. They were sort of milling about the visitors at the reception, and he hadn't been there all that long. Maybe he was there for 10, 15 years. So it must have happened before his time, but there must have been a very tricky time for Bose when they stepped away from the reflected sound story as being their core message.
Yeah, brand.
Marketing principle, that was their whole idea. And so at some point they stopped making that their whole idea. But what was so interesting is actually, at least technically, it never stopped being their whole idea, because what they ended up doing was generating those reflected sounds or those secondary sounds through other means. And it's actually still very core to their whole philosophy and DNA They think about it as being continuous, even though from the outside looking at it, it looks like they kind of gave up on that idea. I don't think that's actually the way they think about it. That was my impression. It's a very interesting company. And if you have a chance just to go to their headquarters building, you drive up a mountain. I think it's called Mountain Road. And so
Framingham, yeah.
they're way up on the
They're-
top of a mountain. And if you're thinking about working there and you're going for an interview, it's just impressive. Anybody who comes to their headquarters will not forget how
their address in Framingham is the mountain.
the mountain. So yeah, it's got some charisma. I have to tell you, it's a
Well,
nice,
Amar Bose was my professor at MIT,
really.
and his charisma was self-generated. He thought he was the greatest thing on the planet. And if anyone crossed him, he just got irate and stormed out.
Well, it takes a special breed to found a company like that. And, whatever you think about Bose this or Bose that, they're still around and going strong, which is not true for a lot of companies. So,
He went through a lot of metamorphosis. I first met him when I was in high school at an MIT open house where he was trying to use an eighth of a sphere full of speakers in every corner of the room. It didn't work well, and then he changed it into the 901 and then started his company.
yeah.
Went to
Interesting.
visit
very
him in 1989 at the company.
Pardon me?
Can you hear me?
No,
Yeah.
I'm not sure who's speaking. I'm sorry.
This is Gary. I went to visit Dr. Bose at the company in 1989.
Oh, wow.
Very interesting.
The
Well,
dates I was talking about are in the 1960s when I first met him.
yeah, they go further back.
time isn't what it used to be.
Uh,
And then I worked with his company in the early days of developing home automation. He was a participant in a major project called Smart House. And it was the first idea of hiding away the subwoofer and just having his small, not he called them tweeters, I think, a combination of mid-range and high-range speakers.
By the way, in the September issue of Audio Express, Gary did have an article on his image model projection. Good article to read.
I was at CEDIA recently and saw a number of companies pitching different configurations of speakers, and I was amazed to see a very large display of a company from the Ukraine that is into loudspeakers. I've got a number of photos. I may assemble them into a sort of montage to include in the BAS speaker. And going through my business cards, there was at least one person who would be interested in being invited as a featured speaker. So I'll pass that on to Alvin.
please do.
Good.
Alvin, do you remember Wings of Pegasus, a British guy we found on YouTube?
Yeah.
His specialty is to find con jobs in the audio world of people who use pitch correction and lip sync at live concerts. But
That was good.
yeah, that he does, and he's getting a lot of professionals and performers very angry. I mean, there were lawsuits against him and threats and all that. This time he had a YouTube video, a very informal test of his audience hearing range. He just took a sine wave oscillator and ran it all the way up from 500 to 20,000 hertz. And reading the feedback, I would say most adults were cutting out between 5 and 10,000 hertz, and it was only their kids who could hear much beyond 10,000. And one kid claimed they could hear 18,000.
What was reproducing the sound?
A sine wave generator.
What speakers? What environment?
Nothing was scientific, nothing was controlled. He was just feeding it into his video.
So probably the computer speakers.
You can hear, either you hear it or you don't. That's science.
I mean, you could turn the volume up as loud as you wanted to hear if you heard anything. And there was a definite cutoff.
But I've always wondered, the sine wave test is one thing, but music is a combination of, let's say, zillions of sine waves. Therefore, it's the algebraic sum at any given point of all of them. And a supersonic one still has an effect on the final shape of
Well, that's assuming the system is nonlinear. The whole theory of combining discrete sine waves is assuming the system is linear. So if you can't hear beyond 10K, you can't recreate it magically.
There was an interesting Chicago section AES meeting one time where an audiologist from Edemotic Research was there. And one of the questions she asked all us technical guys who were there, well, if you can hear to 20 kilohertz and you have these cilia in your ear, if a cilia gets stimulated, how long does it take to recover to get stimulated again? And we're saying, 20 kilohertz, about 50 microseconds. And she laughed at all of us and says, a millisecond. So WTF, man, how can that be? How can you hear 20 kilohertz? Because your ear doesn't work that way. There's a sound wave travels down the auditory canal. Your different cilia, different distances are triggered by the waveform, and your brain demodulates that. And therefore, you can hear a 20 kilohertz. Well, if you're young, you can hear a 20 kilohertz signal, even though it takes about a millisecond for the individual cilia to recover. Blew us all away. So there's a lot going on. And also, and I've heard this before, that the pressure wave traveling down the canal is not what really triggers it. It's the pressure wave coming back down, or maybe a combination of the two. I don't understand all that, but it is not as simple as it looks.
All right, any other notes or questions?
How about that flying saucer?
Yeah, all right. 1 minute for the flying saucer, Richard.
No,
That's it?
No, I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who are representing the data as showing that the thing can't possibly be natural because of the way it changes its velocity, the way it handles energy, and the way it's aimed directly at Mars.
It's going to Mars? It's not coming here?
Well, no, in fact, when it reaches its perihelion, it'll be on the opposite side of the sun from the Earth. So the conspiracy people are thinking that it's planning on doing something on the other when it's out of sight of Earth, and everybody's worried about how it's coming back the other direction.
It's coming back.
And it looks like all the generals, every general in the American military is convening in Virginia tomorrow in order to discuss the flying saucer.
Oh, is that the reason for it?
Oh, okay. Well, that really simplifies my retirement planning.
And how is their sound system?
Well, I was thinking to buy something, but I was feeling bad about it. But
Sounds like Oh Mau Mau, that other thing they had visit a few months ago.
Yeah, this is a big improvement.
Yeah, well, it's much larger, but it's also from out of the solar system. They managed
So was
to track
Oumuamua.
that.
So
Yeah.
was Oumuamua.
Yeah.
Or Turaluralura is what I would like.
Someone just unmuted and created an echo.
That's probably me. I'm not sure why.
And it says echo on your shirt. Does it say echo on your shirt?
Yes, I have an Echo shirt on.
No, you're not it, Alan. It's fine.
Whoever it was muted himself, and we're in good shape. All right, I'm going to stop the mirth here, and we're going to switch to our featured presentation. So yeah, with that,
Did you say we have to be serious?
we have to be serious. We have to dial back. I know, but we've got a real treat. Perry's going to start telling us about his speaker and his
I
philosophy.
just want to point out that he and I have the same facial hair configuration.
Is that true?
The chin is revealed. There's a little bit of emphasis under the lip, and the rest of it is, it's
I think he's got more. I think he's got more mid-range, and you have a little.
Wasn't that little bit under the lip supposed to be for French horn players, according to Anna Russell?
That would be interesting. I understand that there's a Buddhist mystical thing having to do with the hair on the lip, but
I'm sorry, this is entirely too much mirth. We're gonna have to stop. Okay, so with that, Perry, it's all yours.
So it's great to be here. Boston Audio Society is super famous, and I've been reading about you guys since I was a teenager, so it's an honor to be here. The way, Ken, that I would like you to handle questions is
Sure.
I'm going to cover a lot of information. I'd like you to take questions in the chat at first, and then when I get done with my presentation, I'll be delighted to answer all the questions that come. It would be real easy to get off on rabbit trails, and I just want to be careful about that. So here we go. I'm going to share.
Perry, I'm wondering if we should start with at least read a little bit about your bio.
Well, so I will give you a bio, and just hang on a second. There's a bio about just a few slides in, and so I'm going to talk just briefly about some of these designs, and then I'll get right into it. So again, Perry Marshall from Chicago, and I'm going to talk to you about some of my dipole designs. And this is the listening room at Parts Express 2023 speaker design competition.
Can you go to full screen, please?
Yes, I can. And these won first place in the open unlimited category, and you can see the judges there, and these are the live edge dipoles, and they were featured on the cover of Audio Express magazine in 2021. You see there on the left, and that's my award from Parts Express in the middle. And then on the right, there's another article I wrote about the Bitches Brew design. And I'm going to be talking about both of these designs. And I'll get into those details. A little about me. I have a wife and 6 kids, 4 standard issue, 2 adopted. I got an electrical engineering degree from the University of Nebraska, and then I became an acoustical engineer at Jensen for 3 years. My main gig is I'm a business and marketing strategist, which I've been doing for 24 years. And I'm literally the guy who wrote the book on Google and Facebook advertising, as well as a book called 80/20 Sales and Marketing. And I wrote an Ethernet book before my science career, and then 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design, and that is an engineer tackling the origins question. And I'll be so audacious as to say that it's the first book to accurately explain how biological evolution works in plain English. And if you guys think that's an interesting topic, I think you would enjoy that book. I organized a $10 million prize for the origin of the genetic code, which we announced at the Royal Society in London in 2019. And on the right is a photo of that meeting. That is Oxford professor Dennis Noble, who's a fellow of the Royal Society, who invited me to give that talk, and he's one of the prize judges. 5 years ago, I co-founded the Cancer and Evolution Working Group, which is part of the American Association of Cancer Research. And more recently, I co-founded a company called PredictRx, and we are developing an implantable device that detects cancer at stage -1. And information about all these different things is at my website, perrymarshall.info, along with my speaker designs. It's my personal website. So I want to start by saying that audio is not just a bunch of guys playing Steely Dan. I think it's a much deeper endeavor than that. If I were to ask, it'd be a fun exercise we don't have time for, but if I were to ask all of you guys to get out a piece of paper and write the 10 biggest adjectives that you would use to describe the best sound system you ever heard and that you personally liked, if you wrote down those adjectives, when we got done, you would have probably described your own personal values, and in fact, you probably described yourself. I think that audio is a parable for any form of pursuing goodness, virtue, and aspirations. I think speakers are very interesting things to design because speakers are like people. Speakers are very imperfect. They're very eccentric. They're very quirky. They're extremely flawed. They are the most flawed component in the system. Yet, if you know how to combine them right, and if you know how to highlight their weaknesses and highlight their strengths and hide their weaknesses, you can get really extraordinary results, which is what people do with organizations. I also think it's no accident that if you go to Axpona or any other audio show, every single room sort of kind of looks like a Buddhist temple. Well, I say that's because it is. I think a listening room is a temple, and I think an equipment rack is an altar, and I think the equipment is the sacrifice. I think the money that you spent on the sacrifice is the extent of your devotion, and it's directly proportional to your enjoyment, whether the sacrifice is money on your credit card or hours spent building stuff in your workshop. I think it's a pursuit of the ineffable. And it's why people obsess about it so much. It's also a place where you deal with a lot of paradoxes. You have the subjective and the objective. You have music meeting math. You have technology meeting art. And there's no one right way to do it. And there's an old saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. And those of you who design amplifiers or speakers or equipment, I say that however you design those things, it's how you do everything. So, with that said, I think most professions very quickly lose sight of the goal. I think the goal of audio is to fool a person into thinking they're listening to real music. It's not 20 to 20K, DC to daylight. It's not plus or minus 1 dB. It's actually creating a convincing illusion. And the question I'd like to propose to you is, how many speakers have you ever heard that could actually fool just a 6-year-old into thinking that they are listening to real music? Well, I had a gentleman in Wisconsin build the Bitches Brews. His name is John Hilgers. He's a semi-professional clarinet player, and he said he built these speakers, and he said, I play clarinet. My wife upstairs thought I was practicing when I was playing a clarinet recording. She's never made that mistake before, and she is also a clarinet player. So I think we're in a unique category here of having speakers that can actually fool a musician, at least a musician in a different room, that they're hearing real actual music. And I say the speaker industry has been in a coma for the last 40 years. 90% of speakers, they look boxy, they sound boxy, they have very low wife appreciation factor, simulated wood grain finish. They're obsessed with on-axis frequency response. They ignore off-axis. They ignore room acoustics. They ignore the radiation pattern. If you go through the audio magazines, most of the competitive advantages are trivial. Well, we used a certain kind of capacitor, we used a certain kind of cable, or we coated the tweeter dome with some certain, I mean, these are so trivial. The bass is always omnidirectional, 1-inch dome tweeters. Most speakers butcher impulse and phase response. There's the one center of the will of God sweet spot. Room acoustics are ignored in voodoo. The drivers are small and they sound anemic with real music. And I think manufacturers are very slow to adopt new technology, and frankly, so are the consumers. So I wanted to do something different. And what I tried to do here was the accuracy of a done tech, the dynamic range of a clips, and the transparency of a magnapan, all with constant directivity across the whole band in a real room. So killing a lot of birds with one stone. So here's my speaker journey starts with in 1982. I was 13 years old, and I would pay 65 cents and get on the bus and go to downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. And I would walk to all the stereo shops and I would drool and lust over all the stuff that I could not afford. And the best speakers I could find that were even within fathomable reach were the Boston Acoustics A60s, which cost $200, which was still a bloody fortune to me. And one of the guys at a stereo shop told me that if you want to build speakers, you should call this number and get a McGee catalog. And I did. And so they sent me this catalog, and I bought some drivers, and away I went. 4 years later, I had a little brand of speakers called Acoustic Design Limited, and I was selling them through a dealer in Lincoln that also sold Kef and BMW. And when that store went out of business, I learned what it means when the guy says the check is in the mail. And that was my first lesson in accounts receivable. I got an electrical engineering degree, and my motional feedback subwoofer that I built as a senior won the best senior project award. Then I moved to Chicago and became an acoustical engineer at Jensen. And I mostly designed drivers for Honda, Jeep, Cherokee, Acura Vigor. And so after I got laid off from Jensen, it was 30 years ago this month. Business slowed down. I got laid off and I went into sales and marketing. And audio went back to being a hobby. Doing it professionally kind of took some of the fun out of it. And I was kind of glad to get out of it. And after a few years, the fascination came back. And I started doing it again. And so I've built almost every kind of speaker there is: acoustic suspension, reflex, transmission lines, horns, line arrays, shaded arrays, motional feedback, passive, active, analog, DSP, dynamic, bending waves, ribbons. And a few years ago, I wanted to go for an end game, like best system that I can come up with. And I've studied a lot of speaker designers in my career, and the top five would be Roy Allison. I remember they published a advertisement in Stereo Review in a tech section, and I requested their literature, and they sent me these scientific papers. Now, I'm a marketer, and I think using scientific papers to do marketing is terrible marketing. And I don't know that Allison Acoustics was ever a very successful business, but I devoured that paper, and I understood room boundaries. And then later on, John Dunlavey of Dunlavey Labs and Duntech, he designed speakers that had nearly perfect impulse and phase response. And as an electrical engineer, I understood how almost impossible that is to pull off. And he pulled it off. And I had huge respect for that. And he modeled his speakers as analogs of antenna arrays, which later I would do in college. And I decided that based on reading about that, that I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I studied Bill Dunstan of Legacy, where I understood that a speaker has to move a lot of air in order to be authoritative. Then I got on to Don Keel and his constant directivity concepts, and then Siegfried Lequent's concept of open baffle. And I said, how do I combine all five of these guys and thread all of those needles at once? And one of the things that I believe you have to decide or gets decided for you when you design an audio system is, are you trying to achieve they are here, or are you trying to achieve you are there? So you're sitting in your listening chair, does it really sound like you're at Carnegie Hall or at Iridium Jazz Club in New York? Is that what it really sounds like? Or does it more like sound like the musicians came into your room and you have a jazz combo or rock band playing in your living room? You kind of have to decide between the two. Now, the "you are there" is almost impossible to pull off unless you completely eliminate room reflections. And there are very few speaker designs that do that kind of thing. And that would be designs like the Klipsch Jubilee or the Danley multi-entry horns that are highly directive and don't have radiation behind the speaker. Almost impossible to pull off in the real room. An easier, more attainable objective is the "they are here." Does it sound like there's a clarinet player in your living room? So my first open baffle was about 6 years ago. I made this A-frame box and I used a Phytal Pro 12-inch coax with a rear firing tweeter. And I'll never forget the first time I got these working. It was 7 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't play loud music because everybody else was asleep, but I was playing this very simple classical guitar recording. And I was instantly impressed at how lifelike and full-bodied that guitar sounded through an open baffle speaker. And then when I could turn it up and dial it in, I was also impressed at the dynamic range and energy of using a pro driver. Now, previously, I had a bias against pro drivers because they typically they don't have as accurate a frequency response and they're harder to tame, and horns can be difficult to work with. But I tamed all those beasts with DSP. It required a 17 dB boost to get down to 40 hertz, and I was hooked. And I did it as an experiment just because I'd never tried it before. But I came to feel that if you're going after a "they are here" objective, open baffle is really hard to beat. So the only problem with these was that they couldn't go below 40. I had them rolled off very quickly below 40, and they could play pretty loud and pretty respectable down to 40. But if you wanted it to go down to 30 or 20, it needed more horsepower in the bass. And so I decided to do something different. And it was only a few months later, I happened to go to Big Red Sawmill in Palmyra, Nebraska, when I was visiting some family. And I walked into this wood shop and they had all these different slabs of wood. And I thought, now this would be a way to make an open baffle speaker. It would be a lot prettier than that. So I bought some slabs of wood and brought them home. And so that became the Live Edge Dipoles. Now, if I back up to this slide, what you see here is this is a 12-inch coaxial unit. The tweeter fires through the middle of the woofer. It has an aperture inside the voice coil. The woofer cone is an extension of the tweeter horn and acts as a horn. It's a very clever, elegant way to design a speaker. Tannoy made this famous years ago. And so it has a very consistent radiation pattern. It has a lot of desirable characteristics. And I also, when I got it working, I did not have that tweeter on the back. And I immediately felt that there was a mismatch, that the energy response from the room did not match the sound directly from the driver. And when I added a tweeter in the back, it fixed it. And all of my open baffle designs have tweeters on the back because I think the way to do it is for both sides to be constant directivity. And I think it makes the system sound much better. And so this just being basically a two-way, I decided to expand to a three-way. And so the 12-inch coax became an 8-inch coax. and I added an 18-inch woofer and an A-frame at the bottom, and that became the live edge dipoles that you see in the middle. And then the next system I did is essentially the same thing, but it's a 15-inch coax on the top and two 15-inch subs on the bottom. And I'll get into the wiring and the crossover stuff later. But what I'm pointing out with this illustration is all three of these are essentially the same speaker. And the live edge dipoles in the middle are a three-way instead of a two-way. And the Bitches Brews are a three-way instead of a two-way. And the Bitches Brew and live edge dipole are really very, very similar concept. They just have slightly different drivers and slightly different crossover frequencies. And as I go into this, you'll see that it kills a lot of birds with one stone, so to speak. So a dipole or an open baffle radiates equally on both sides with a null at the 90-degree mark. Now, a lot of people say the advantages of dipoles is they mess with room modes less. I don't really buy that. I think the room modes with dipoles are just as complicated, if not more, than with regular speakers. But the way I see it is the advantage of a dipole is it's the only way to get constant directivity at low frequencies without a horn. And since most of us don't have room for a 20-foot horn in our living room, it's the only way to get constant directivity. And constant directivity gives you superb imaging all over the room and not just in the sweet spot. And so that's really, in my opinion, the purpose of a dipole. And so a typical speaker, if you do a spinorama plot, it looks like this, where below 500 hertz, the speaker is omnidirectional, and above 500 hertz, it's directional. And I think that difference is a giant discontinuity. Your ear hears the energy in the room separate from the direct energy. It sounds unnatural. Audiophiles train themselves to ignore it, but you can't ignore it because you live in the real world. And they just don't sound like real instruments. And this is not the radiation pattern of a real instrument or a real band. And it's especially noticeable, as Linkwitz liked to say, when you walk outside the room. You can tell that you're listening to a speaker even more outside the room than inside the room. Well, this is the radiation pattern of the Bitches Brew. And it's very even. It's very directional all the way down to 20 hertz. And the radiation pattern very gradually narrows as you go. So it's if you go with the bright yellow line at low frequencies, it has about a 60-degree radiation pattern. And at above 10 kilohertz, it has a 15-degree radiation pattern. And it's very consistent and even. There are very few speakers that do this. And I think radiation pattern is one of the things that separates the men from the boys in speaker design. It has a huge effect on the sound. And then there's DSP. I think most people underutilize the capabilities of digital signal processing. They use it to do all the same tasks that they used to use passive crossovers to do. And I say, why even bother with DSP if you're just going to regurgitate the same stale speaker dogmas that everybody else has been copying for 40 years? What I did with these designs was I optimized the system for radiation pattern, and then I fixed it with DSP. I fixed the frequency response at the end with DSP. I also optimized these for time, phase, and impulse response, which very few designers do. I think it's important. I'm kind of mystified that people will say, well, you don't need to optimize a speaker for phase response. You can't hear that. Well, some people can. A lot of people insist they can. I think they can. and you can for sure measure it. Like, why would you not try to optimize the measurements of your system if you can obviously clearly measure it? So this is the frequency response of the bitches brews in an actual real room. We're not gating out room reflections at all. This is 12 different mic positions averaged together, and you see what you should normally shoot for in a real room, which is a very gently tapering response where it's probably 6 to 8 dB high in the bass, and then it just tapers down gently and it's very smooth and flat. This is a client event that I hosted at a hotel, and in the evening after dinner, we had a listening party, and I took the bitches brews to the hotel, and I brought a sound system, and everybody put a song in the playlist, and these are just ordinary civilians. And in this room, every seat in the house has a good stereo image. You can stand right next to one speaker and you hear the other speaker clearly across the room, and you hear a good image spread between the two speakers. That is very rare. Let me talk about the wings or the S curve on the side. So when you build an open baffle speaker, if you just stick the drivers on a flat piece of wood and it's 15 or 20 inches wide, it will start rolling off at about 80 to 100 hertz. And it'll roll off at 6 dB per octave, which means at 50 hertz, you're down 6 dB. At 25 hertz, you're down 12 dB. At 20 hertz, you're down 15 dB. And then you have to compensate with lots of EQ and large woofers. Before we had DSP, you had to compensate with high Q woofers, which will only take you so far. Well, with the bitches brew and with a lot of other designs, if you go look around, people will put wings on the woofers, which extend the woofer response. And so in the bitches brew, the top driver is a mid-range and tweeter crossed at 100. And then the bottom two are subwoofers. And in this particular cabinet, the dipole roll-off frequency is about 40 hertz. And so this extends the response down to 40, and then your EQ, you only have to use extreme EQ below 40. But because the S is narrow at the top driver has a dipole roll-off of about 100 hertz. And so when you combine those together, they blend and you get a good radiation pattern from bottom to the top, and you get some of the benefits of the box without a box. And the back is completely open, as you'll see in some of my later slides. And I used a hybrid passive and active crossover. It's a three-way system, but I'm using 2 amps, 4 channels, and there's a tweeter amp and there's a woofer amp that drives both the mid-range and the subwoofers. Now, I think time response is very important, and typical step responses from speakers look like this. The upper left one is pretty good. The tweeter fires, then the mid-range fires, then the woofer fires. The one on the lower left is almost certainly a horn because the tweeter is firing after the mid-range. And most speakers butcher step responses and impulse responses. This is what the bitches brew step response looks like. It is excellent. And you get this not only on axis, but anywhere off axis, it looks very, very similar. The time is accurate at all of the different angles. In fact, it's pretty good behind the speaker too, which I'll get to. This is the impulse response. It is almost unheard of for a speaker to have an impulse response this good. And so what this is saying is that if you put an infinitely short signal into the speaker, all the energy is concentrated on a very short period of time. It all fires in the same direction and it settles down rapidly. This would be easily in the top 0.5% of all speakers in terms of impulse response. And the only ones that would be as good would typically be electrostatics or planars that are very well designed, or maybe electrostatic headphones. Or you would also get this from a linear phase speaker like a Duntech or a Teal or a Vandersteen. This is the phase response. Most speakers have multiple phase rotations. I'll get into how I did this in a little bit, but the measured phase response is plus or minus 30 degrees above 100 hertz all the way to the top. So that's very unusual. And I think it has a definite effect on imaging and definition. The crossovers in these speakers, they all have acoustic slopes of approximately 12 dB per octave, which is hard to pull off. So the woofers you can see, they very gradually taper down. The crossover is actually at 3K, and then you can see the tweeters tapering down, and they overlap over several octaves, and you cannot hear that transition. It does not show up in measurements. It does not show up in the polar pattern, and it's consistent at all the different angles around the speaker. Now, between the subwoofer and the mid-range, I did something very unusual. You rarely see this. It is a series crossover instead of a parallel crossover. The mid-range and the woofer are wired in series, and the woofer has an inductor wired in parallel with it. The mid-range has an inductor in parallel, and the subwoofers have a capacitor in parallel. And if somebody wants to get technical about this, I can show you the difference of what had happened if I use a conventional parallel crossover. But I get a beautiful affordance here where the subwoofer rolls off very well behaved at 6 dB per octave, and it starts rolling off at about 80 hertz. And then the mid-range is a shelf filter where the impedance peak of the subwoofer reduces the input to the mid-range at about 30 hertz, which is exactly where you want the mid-range to be protected from the subwoofer signals. And so this enables me to use just 2 amps instead of 3, use a digital crossover that's fairly simple, and have a very, very simple passive crossover with only 2 components between the woofer and the mid-range. Very proud of that. And so this is a slalom where we are trying to accomplish everything. We are trying to balance all of the priorities. So let me go through these. So open baffle versus other enclosures, it's never a question of which is better. It's just a question of what kind of trade-offs each one does. If you design an open baffle with the right physical parameters of the driver, you'll get just as much bass extension for the amount of real estate you've taken up as you would with a box speaker, except in an open baffle, you're dealing with surface area instead of 3D volume. It's a very, very interesting trade-off. And I've never heard anybody really talk about this, but it's fascinating. And Hoffman's iron law still applies, that there's no free lunch. When you fix an open baffle with EQ, which you pretty much have to, you're losing ground at the rate of 18 decibels per octave instead of 12 decibels per octave as you are with a box speaker. And so the clutch is slipping very rapidly. And what that practically speaking means is you probably need wings on the design if you want a lot of SPL. And it also means that below the cutoff frequency, you need to roll it off so that the woofer is not panting uselessly with sub band signals. Only open baffles and horns can give you constant directivity, and only a very large horn can give you constant directivity in a room. There's the drivers and the design were very carefully chosen so that the drivers have very wide bandwidth and that I can actually achieve a 12 dB per octave acoustic slope. And that allows me to introduce a minimum of phase shift. I've combined passive with active to create what I feel is a very elegant way of approaching it. I used coaxes instead of separate drivers so that there's no lobing issues, and I fixed the remaining problems with DSP. This is really almost what you'd call a 2.5-way system. And we're getting flat on-axis response and flat room response. And I'm also using IIR DSP filters with FIR DSP filters at the same time, and I'm using each for the purpose for which it's best suited. And so, if you measure the rear side of the speaker, this is the measurement you get. You see that the frequency response is fairly good. You can flip the speakers 180 and they still sound great. And you can see that the step response is also good behind the speaker. So that means the reflections from the walls also reflect good time and phase response. Because the acoustic slopes of the two crossover points are 12 dB per octave, it means that the mid-range has reverse polarity and that I get one full 360-degree phase rotation from the speaker. I found that I could easily correct that with a FIR DSP filter that looks like this, and it restores the speaker very easily to linear phase. And it doesn't require complex filtering functions. These are very simple max phase filters that I created in Eclipse DSP software. I've had a lot of people build these around the world. You can look at the DIY audio forum and you can see most of these. John Hilgers is the clarinet player, and that's a picture of him. I went and saw him in Wisconsin last year. Brian Turow in Indiana built the system in the middle, and you can see that those don't have wings. They're open, but he actually made fixtures that he can add wings if he wants them. And if you don't have the wings, it just requires more EQ, and it probably means they'll go down to about 30 or 35 instead of going all the way down to 20. Jacob Patterson built these ones on the right, and he's in Sweden. This is more information on Brian Turow's build. I think he did a fabulous job with these things. On the left is Tom Larwa's system, also in Wisconsin. And on the right, Nelson Fitch built these gorgeous speakers. He just finished them within the last few weeks. And he's here in Chicago. I hope he'll let me come over and see him sometime. So Jacob emailed me and he said, "This is the best speaker I've ever heard." I had a friend over and he said the same thing. I was at a hi-fi shop and listened to the Avant-Garde Trio system that retails at approximately $300,000 here in Sweden, but both him and I think this sounds better. Nelson Fitch said one of the great things about the Bitches Brew design is the seamless wall of sound effect. Jay Hyder is a member of Chicago Audio Society, and he came over. I hosted them a couple years ago at my house. He said, "Excellent with spot-on tonality, very precise imaging and multiple seats, and a better sense of slam than I'd previously heard in an open baffle. They looked great for such large speakers too." And so what we obtained here was 2020K at listener position in a real room, constant directivity, both front and rear, linear phase plus or minus 30 degrees across the whole spectrum, very low distortion, gorgeous step and impulse response. Oh yeah, they're efficient. These the Bitches Brews are about 100 decibels for 2.8 volts. The live edge dipoles are about 95. And that sensitivity makes a big difference. When you play drums, they have slam and they punch you in the chest. And there's an effortlessness and a sense of headroom that most systems do not have. I think most audiophiles are accustomed to hearing large amounts of distortion at high volumes and a very high wife appreciation factor. Women like these things. There's not many speakers that can brag about that. Like I said, if you stand next to the left speaker, you can hear the right speaker very clearly. The imaging is very precise with great depth, extreme resolution. The drivers blend very seamlessly, and I really feel that I've achieved the best of dynamics and horns and planars all in one system. And I took my kids to Axpona a couple years ago, and I asked my son when we left, I said, so how does that compare to what you're used to hearing at home? I said, how many boos were better than what you're used to or as good? And he said, oh, maybe two. So if you're the kind of person who likes a north of $100,000 sound system, you can build these things for about $6,000 and they'll compete with anything in the market. And the designs are all online and you can go, if you go to perrymarshall.info/speakers, I've got these and some other designs. I've got links to DIY audio and you can go explore to your heart's content. We've got DSP files, drawings, bill of materials, and a very detailed explanation of the design philosophy. So I think now would be a good time for questions.
All right. Well, Perry, before the questions, let me thank you for this presentation. It was really cool. And for your generosity to not just tell us about it, but then to give away the designs so that anybody with sufficient interest can put it together. And in my opinion, this is the lifeblood of what we do, because without people with the time but not the money when they're young, if they don't get into it, they're never going to get into it. And so it's truly a gift.
When I was 13, I read an ad in the back of the McGee catalog for Speaker Builder magazine. And I later became friends with Ed Dell, the editor. And in that ad, it said, the speaker you really dream of may only be possible if you build it yourself. There are many commercial compromises that make it very difficult for a manufacturer to sell a speaker like this that can do what this does because there are so many hoops that had to be jumped through. The shipping and the commercial issues and the manufacturing and all the rest. But you can go to a really cool lumber yard that's somewhere around you. You can buy a couple of slabs of gorgeous live edge wood for probably $500 to $1,000. You can pay a carpenter with a CNC machine to go cut them for you or build them. There's carpenters everywhere. There's cabinet makers everywhere. And you give them, that's what I did. I did not actually build these cabinets. I outsourced them to some people. And yeah, the bitches brews were probably about $6,000, and that included the carpenter's fees and, plus or minus for inflation or whatever. But for less than $10,000, you're getting something that can legitimately compete in the $250,000 range in the magical world of audiophilia.
Yeah, and embarrass those people. Now, if you were to try to build a truly discount version where you were just using the plainest of lumber, just as a scientific experiment, no wife factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then what would you estimate it would cost to build?
Well, I'll just rattle off like the bitches brews. The coaxes are about $900 each. The subwoofers are 170 each, and there's so two coaxes and 4 subwoofers. The DSP is about $700. The crossover components are a few $100, and then wiring and connectors and stuff.
Yeah.
So less than $5,000 for sure.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. Well, I know there were a number of questions that came in the chat window, and rather than read them, because we're all here, why don't you, folks ask questions or raise your hand, and we can do it that way if it looks like we're going to run into each other.
Oh, well, Nelson just mentioned, Nelson is one of the people I showed his design. He said he's happy to chime in on his build process if people are interested. And Nelson put a build thread at DIY Audio where he chronicled what he put a bill of materials and stuff in there. And I haven't even looked at these questions, so I'd have to, if somebody wants to pick
I
a
can
person.
I'll read one of them. So I'm just going to take one at random. So one question came in. Can you help people understand what an open baffle is? Just this concept of an open baffle and what makes an open baffle open, and maybe one that's not quite as open as another. Just give us a little bit more.
Okay, so let me try something. I'm gonna walk around my room and I'll show you I'll show you the speakers. Okay, so this is a live Edge Dipoles, and if I turn and look at the back, do you see the back?
Yeah.
So open baffle means there's no box, and this has wings at the bottom. You can see on each side of the woofer, there's a triangular piece of wood that's probably 30 inches high and 20 inches deep. And those wings extend the cutoff from probably 80 or 100 hertz down to about 60. And that's just based on the depth of those wings. And if they were, the bitches brews have deeper wings, and so it pushes it down to about 40. Then you compensate with the roof for the woofer roll off and the cancellation. So I think probably everybody knows that if you take a woofer out of a box while you're playing it, all the bass goes away because the front wave cancels the back wave and it just goes around to the other side. And so wisdom has always said, well, of course you need a box because you have to stop that from happening. Well, that's a rule that you can abide by when you design a speaker. But another rule you can abide by is, well, I'm going to have a flat baffle or I'm going to have an open back and I'm going to let that cancellation occur, but I'm going to compensate it with EQ, which in the DSP world you can do very, very easily. And now I'm going to buy myself an advantage, which is radiation pattern control. Now the speaker is constant directivity, not just in the mid-range and treble, but all the way down in the bass, and I get a consistent pattern all the way through. Here, I'll share my screen again, and I'm going to show you a different view of, so these are some measurements of, okay, so this graph right here is on axis and then 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, and 90 degrees.
Wow.
And what you see here is that and this is in a real room and they are purposefully EQ'd. So there's more bass because that's what sounds right in a room. And so on axis, they're fairly flat, above 100 hertz. And then as you go off axis, the level just evenly drops. Almost all other speakers, the bass stays the same and the treble drops off.
Yeah.
You can hear that. You're here. All of the room reflections tell you that the speaker has an uneven radiation pattern. So
that's the specific phenomenon then, is that you get this consistency of response, no matter which angle you're at. And in particular, the bass response doesn't collect up in that way to give you that boominess.
Yeah, that's right. And so I would say that open baffle speakers are more sensitive to room placement. Oops. But maybe you can figure out who's
I stopped that, yeah, I think.
um
Flying saucer.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry
we
about
have been bombed.
We may have been bombed. Thank you very much, but I stopped it. Okay, keep
okay.
going. Oh,
Um
I'm sorry. We've got, yeah, we have problems.
so I think open baffle speakers are more sensitive to room placement than regular box speakers, but you have a lot of choices and you can move them around and you can angle them. And if you're using DSP, you can EQ to your heart's content. I think
I'm removing these people, but it's not easy to do as fast as they're coming.
Could I explain the basis of the question after we get done being bombed?
it sounds like he solved it. So go ahead.
Yeah, hopefully it's gone. All right.
This is Gary. I I forgot what I was going to say. The reason
That
that I
was
asked the
pretty
question
exciting.
is
Well, let's all take a deep breath there. Sorry about that.
there are open baffle maker companies that are making them with a wooden horn as the tweeter that fires just out the front. I believe that an open baffle means it should be dipolar at all frequencies so that the reflected sound from the front of the room is equal to the front radiation in frequency.
I
And
agree.
I also think that you need to pay attention to the direct to reflected ratio so that you have a good solid reflected field going out there, which kind of happens automatically as you go back in the room. In a larger room, the direct field goes down automatically because you're farther away from the speakers. And so you get a good DR ratio as well as power response, and the imaging forms itself right out there in front of you. That's
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
agree.
Carrie, a question I thought of was the width of the baffle that you have.
Yes.
Is that very impactful? You've picked an amount there. Is more better?
So that's a very interesting question, and it depends on the frequency. So the width determines the frequency at which the baffle itself affects the directivity. So here's a rule of thumb. If you take a tape measure and you measure from the woofer magnet and you bend it around the speaker all the way to the dust cap on the front of the woofer, you'll get a certain number of inches. If you take the number 2000 and divide by that distance, you'll get roughly the frequency at which it starts to roll off. And the so the live edge dipoles have about almost a 2 foot wide baffle. So that means they're directional above probably about even with no wings or anything, they're directional above 150 hertz. Now, one of the things that most people don't know about open baffles is that if you taper the baffle so that it's narrower in the mid range, then the mid range it will affect the mid range radiation pattern. So there's a gentleman on the DIY forum named Charlie Laub. He wrote an article in Audio Express and he talked about minimally baffled open baffle speakers. and he puts drivers on a baffle naked. Like he literally does it with chicken wire, and there's no baffle at all. And that means if you have an 8-inch driver as a mid-range on a piece of chicken wire, it means it's starting to roll off at probably 600 or 800 hertz. And then you have to boost it with EQ down to the point where you're comfortable that that 8-inch driver could handle it, which might be, 150 or 200 or something like that. And the more minimally baffled your design is, the more truly constant directivity it will be, but you will also have to compensate with a lot of EQ, and you'll have some other compromises that you make in the process.
Got it. Thank you for that. All right, and Richard had a question, raised his hand.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Perry. When I was back in the day, I learned about somebody at KLH made the distinction between bipolar, and dipolar. The idea, so I noticed that the woofer, if the back output of the woofer is in the room, that's a bipolar situation. There was a bunch of speakers that had one speaker playing into the room and a whole other speaker on the back panel playing the back of the room, and that would be, they were doing the same thing rather than having an out of phase thing.
Yeah, that would be a bipole. That would be a bipole.
That's the bipolar.
Mine is a dipole, right?
Yours is a dipole. Okay.
There's a big difference, right?
Yes.
Because a bipole will not have the null on the side.
Oh, well, KLH9s did have a null on the side.
Well, then maybe were the rear drivers in reverse polarity?
I don't know. I don't think there were any rear drivers. But maybe I'm not remembering correctly, because I was very disappointed when I had an array of 8 KLH9 panels in front of me, and the sound was awful, and so I gave up on. But I'm curious, because your rear firing tweeter is in phase. Or is it wired out of phase?
It's in the same phase as the back of the speaker.
Oh, it is. So it is a dipole.
It's a true dipole all the way across.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And let's see, Lucas, you have a question?
Hi, Lucas.
Hi. Congratulations on the design, first of all. It's the first time I see it. I'm into open baffles a long time myself, but I'm not an engineer and just experimenting here in Poland. But I have a question. I'm not sure I'm clear about the design of your speakers, because you're using mini DSP as the crossover, but then you also have these passive elements in the speaker, and I just kind of missed that bit. Why is that necessary? Can it all be done in the mini DSP?
Absolutely, it can be, and that's just a personal design choice. So let me share my screen again, and I will show you the Audio Express article that I wrote about this, and I'll kind of explain the trade-offs. So you can build these and triamp them and not have passive crossovers. Absolutely. And in fact, on the DIY forum, if you poke around and look hard enough, I think you'll find a DSP file that I made that is a 3-way instead of a 2-way. So you would triamp instead of biamp. The reason that I had a passive crossover was I just personally felt it was much more convenient to have 2 amps instead of 3. At the time, I was using a Adcom 2535, which is a 4-channel amp. And if you had a 4-channel amp, it's super convenient. And the passive crossovers, I don't feel degrade the sound in any significant way. So it was less wiring, but again, it's just It's just a choice that you could easily do a different way if you prefer. This is what the crossover looks like. So on the top, you see the 360 microfarad in parallel with the subwoofers. There's a 6 millihenry in parallel with the mid-range. And then this is the tweeter section. And I've got an 80 microfarad capacitor, which I would never remove that because you don't want to accidentally get buzz in your amp and blow out a tweeter. That's why that's there. There's a little trap circuit that fixes a peak that the rear horn has at 4 kilohertz. And then I have a 6 ohm resistor on the front tweeter so that it pads the front down to match the rear. And this makes the rear a little bit louder on the backside than the front, which sounds right to my ear. And then I set the levels in the DSP. But as you can see, that's an extremely simple crossover. I could show you the DSP settings. It's much more complicated filtering in the DSP. And so at every step, I used filtering with the most appropriate components that I had at my disposal to try to make things as absolutely simple and elegant as possible.
Well, along those lines, I personally use Mini DSP and like it very much, but I also use the DSP Dirac room correction software. And I'm curious if you've experimented with that and how that interacts with your design.
Yes, I have. I think Dirac is fine, and Dirac is designed so that mortals can use it. And because it's designed that way, it gives you only a limited amount of control over what it does and the targets. I have used Dirac and I think it gives good results. In my case, I decided to use my own custom finite impulse response filters that I generated myself and to use EQ like my room has a peak at 40 and another peak at 75, and I use notch filters in the DSP to fix those.
Got it. So manual override for you.
Yeah.
Okay, understood.
A lot, I think Nelson has been using Dirac. He can talk about that. And by the way, in the chat, John Hilger said his were 4,000. And Nelson said wood, DSP, and amp speaker parts for him were 2,900. So it's less than I even told you it was.
Yeah. Yeah, those are incredible
Sorry,
values.
without the wood. So
Oh,
just
okay.
the drivers and the crossover parts. Yeah.
Great. So add $1,000 for the wood. So yeah, we're looking at about 4,000.
Okay. Now, I have another question here about the angle of the baffle.
Yeah.
And what significance does that have? How did you optimize that and so on?
So both of these lean back just a little bit. I think the live edge dipoles are 7 degrees. I think the bitches brews are 10. I told Nelson if I had to do it all over again, I'd tilt the bitches brews back 5 instead of 10 degrees. I think they look better. They look better when they're tilted back. They look like they're going to fall over if they're straight up. And I set it so at the listening position, the drivers are pointed right at your ears. So some of it is acoustics and some of it is aesthetics.
Got it. And then another question is there a recommendation in terms of the size of the room that you use for speakers like this? And are there different dipole, baffle sizes and other things to take into consideration when thinking about different room sizes?
So I would say that my rooms are relatively on the small size. So the Bitches Brew room is 12 by 14, not a really big room. The speakers are hugely oversized for the room. You could put them in a much bigger room and they would be just fine. Um, I I think you could make smaller so like you know what, it depends on how deep you want the bass to go.
Yeah.
That really, that just like with any other speaker, that's ultimately the determiner.
Yeah.
Um,
To be a particular distance from the rear wall and side walls?
Most people will tell you that 3 to 5 feet from the rear walls is optimal. And I don't think the sidewalls are nearly as important, because if you draw a diagram of the room, and if the speakers are towed in, so they're pointing at you, the reflection in the sidewall is coming off the knoll.
Hmm.
And so there's not much of a sidewall reflection if you turn the speakers towards the listener. And so I really like that. I think that is another reason why the imaging is good, and you're taking advantage of the constant directivity design to not have early reflections in the room. Meanwhile, the back of the speaker is providing later reflections, which are very enjoyable to hear.
Got it. So you get the best of both worlds there. And that's
Yes.
always the trade-off. Yeah, that I think I finally understand. Thank you for that. Yeah, I get that. Um, so another question had to do with room treatments, and I guess maybe there were two. One was more general, but one also in the contest. What was used?
Well, contests are really dicey, as Tom Perzell can tell you. I took the Bitches Brews to the 2022 competition and I didn't score, and I think it was because my DSP EQ was wrong for the room and it just didn't ring the bell for the judges. I do think the Bitches Brew is a better speaker than the Live Edge Dipole, even though the Live Edge Dipole is the one that won the following year. Um, there were no real room treatments in that room. So something I've never heard anybody talk about, and it took me some experiments to figure this out, but when you are listening to a full range dipole speaker in a real room, most of the bass comes from the backside of the woofer and is reflected. So think Roy Allison, those of you who ever studied Roy's room acoustics papers. Most of the bass is reflected from the backside of the woofer from the back and side walls. It's not coming from the front side of the woofer. And so you're actually getting a very complex listening field where the mid-range above probably 100 hertz is, or maybe 70 or 80 hertz is all coming from the front side of the speaker, but most of the bass is coming from the back side of the speaker. One of the things I like about constant directivity designs is that room treatments become less important because the speaker is actually very directional. These below, let's say 2 kilohertz, these speakers are much more directional than almost all other speakers that you would buy, or at least below 1000 hertz. And so in that sense, they're less vulnerable to the vagaries of the room.
Now, here's a question about the coaxial driver and whether the woofer on which the tweeter unit is mounted, whether the woofer is modulating the tweeter sound, and whether you have to worry about that or deal with that.
So in a two-way, you do have that problem. So I showed you the first two-way that I made, and they go down to 40, and it took a 17 dB boost of that 12-inch Pro woofer to get it down to 40. And so if you crank it up really loud and the bass is pumping, it does modulate the treble, and it's probably noticeable to a really serious listener that that's happening. But in the Live Edge Dipoles and the Bitches Brew, which have crossover frequencies of 100 to 200 hertz, it's working as a mid-range, and you can never see the mid-range cone moving. And so you can play them very loud, and there's no modulation, and there's very little distortion. And they can play quite loud. And even the smaller ones, the live edge dipoles, you can put them in a pretty big room, and if you're not trying to push them too hard in the bass, they will play quite loud. I want to show you something that I think you'll find very interesting. This is just a second. Let me show you. There are two EQ curves in the live edge dipoles that are baked into the downloadable files. So this orange curve is what I call the rock and roll setting, and the blue curve is the full range setting. And what this is a measurement of the voltage at the driver terminals, the woofer terminals, after all the DSP and the crossovers and everything. If you use this EQ curve, which you can see is a 19 decibel boost at 30 hertz,
Huge.
the live edge dipoles go down to 25 hertz flat. And the only trouble is at 25 hertz, you can't push them too hard or you'll hear them strain. So if you like 25 hertz music and it's not 110 decibels of EDM, you'll be happy. But if you want to play it loud, or if you got big bass drums and you don't want the speaker to sound strained, then you roll them off at 30, which is the orange curve. Most people would never miss the missing bass below 30, and they will play very loud. So really, the size of the room, it really just comes down to how low do you want to push the speaker, because you can use as much EQ as you want. You're just eventually going to run out of amplifier power and woofer excursion.
Got it. All right. Now Nelson offered to talk a little bit about his build process, and
Go for it.
Also his wife's reaction to all of this.
Hey, yeah. I don't know if my video is showing up or not, but
It's not.
oh,
If
here
you
we go.
show something, yeah.
There you go.
Okay, I can see you. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much, Perry. It's ridiculous that you make these extremely sophisticated designs and just, let us have our way with them, and do whatever we like. So, honestly, one thing that's really remarkable about at least the Bitches Brew, and I think the Live Edge would probably be similar, is that it is like weirdly easy to build. Like I've built more than a dozen speakers, mostly boxes though, and with boxes you have to deal with bracing and ports, and there's a lot of factors and resonances. And like with these, if you can build a slab, like a tabletop that's not very deep, like you can build the Bitches Brew. And that's kind of remarkable considering how sophisticated the technology in them is. I do like building complex things, but this was not so hard. It's, if you want to do a good job and make it really pretty and a good finish, of course you take your time. But yeah, so just if anybody is thinking about it, and if you feel intimidated, it's just like significantly less complicated than a lot of other things. However, they are big and they are heavy, so moving them around is formidable, I guess. And it is kind of crazy how there aren't really other speakers that do what these do. And I think that one thing Perry said at the beginning about constant directivity is just like that evenness was a value. And for me, the defining feature, as I've been listening to these for the last few weeks since I finished it, is just how even it is throughout the room. It is wild, like standing up, walking around. I've had dinner parties and people over, and it's something that a lot of people who are familiar with nice sound systems comment on. It's so even, and that is really nice. My room is an acoustic. I don't know if it's a disaster. It's big and it has glass walls, all windows on the ground floor. And there's no curtains, there's roller shades, but those don't really do anything. So it's extremely reflective. And one of the reasons I picked this design was because it has those, at least the theory, it seemed like an educated guess that with the side knolls that these have, those reflections, with a little bit of towing, those sidewall reflections off those glass walls would be minimized more than with other designs. I also considered some multiple entry horns, but to achieve more of the constant directivity and narrow dispersion to do that too. But those are not easy to build, and complicated for a million other reasons. But yeah, I put them in the room, and I immediately thought, like, these are huge, and my wife's gonna freak out, and like I'm gonna have to put them in my office and find something else for in here. And she loves them, so she's like, no, they're statuesque, like it really is. So I put minor solid walnut with brown grill cloth in those circles, like Perry's original design has them, and they really feel like just these wooden trunks. They're really sculptural, and I think fit into like a very nicely designed living room really, really well. One thing I would note, some people are talking about triamping and doing the, skipping some of the passive crossover to do a full 3-way DSP solution. I chose to do the 2-way with 4-amp channels, and literally one of the main reasons was this way I can just have like a 4-conductor canary speaker wire with a Neutrik speak-on termination. So each speaker, despite having, an absolute mess behind it of wires and all this DSP, it's just one speaker wire going to each tower, which for me, like from a design perspective in the room, like I didn't want to overcomplicate the wiring and just for visual reasons. So it's pretty minimal. It's super elegant. And yeah, I found it to be very rewarding. I'm still doing a few tweaks. I think there's a couple minor differences that I guess one thing I would say is, although the construction is easy, my baffle is a little different than Perry's. Mine's not live edge, as you can see in the photo there. They're straight edged, and it's a touch narrower because of that. I think mine's 19 inches wide with straight right angle sides. And additionally, my side wings are not as deep at the top or at the back as Perry's. And I haven't seen Perry's raw measurements of his mid-range, but you can assume from those things that we're gonna have a little bit of a different response up there with those things. So I do intend to get in, and I've already made a couple tweaks to the mini DSP settings because of that, but you definitely need to get in there and measure as you do your own build. That goes with any build. If you don't have a measurement mic, don't build speakers, probably is how it goes. But
but these are beautiful, man. I mean, I just think they're fabulous. You did a marvelous job with these.
Thank you. Yeah, you should come see them. You're welcome.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a rant, but if you have any questions from the construction perspective, I think I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. John, I think John's here as well. Maybe he could chime in too. But I've loved them. My wife loves them. They're impactful. Bass is great. You listen with your eyes and your ears. We can't help it. So having speakers this beautiful is worth it, in my opinion.
This is John. This is John. I'd make one other comment. I was initially put off by trying to figure out how to make the front of these speakers. And it eventually occurred to me that if you think about how to make a circular tabletop about 15 inches or 18 inches diameter, I don't remember what the size was. You throw away the tabletop and you keep the other part. That's how you make it.
Oh, okay. So it's like, if you want an 18-inch tabletop, then start with a 20-inch piece of wood and cut a hole in it.
Exactly so.
Yeah, you're just making three 15-inch tabletops in a line. Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Next question. We're getting close to the end here, but the next question is, why did you use a horn tweeter in the back?
Well, I don't know how you could get away with anything else. The front horns have sensitivity of 106 dB.
Yes.
And that's for both designs. So you have to have a high efficiency driver. And I wanted constant directivity on both sides, so I picked a constant directivity horn to put on the back so that the rear radiation pattern matches the front radiation pattern as exactly as I can get it to go. And then what I found is, to my ears in my room, like my room is a library and it's a fairly well damped room. I find it sounds best if the tweeters on the back are about 3 dB hotter than the tweeters on the front. That sounds about right to my ear. Of course, you could use an L pad or whatever you want to change that any way you want. And the live edge dipoles do have an L pad built right into the schematic. And I usually have it turned about 3/4 of the way up.
Great. Now, there's a comment here. Thank you for the presentation. I think we all feel that way. And remarking that he's going to reach out to John Hilgers to give them a listen. But that begs the question, what if we're not in Minnesota and we want to listen to these things? Is there a way to find someone who's got one to demonstrate, or how does that work?
Well, it's kind of catch as catch can. First of all, on DIY audio, I can only speak for myself. On DIY audio, and in my presentation, you can see some names. And if you want to message those people and ask them, feel free. If you're in Chicago and you go, there's a contact form on the perrymarshall.info website. And if you seem like a sensible, nice person, Nelson came over and saw me about 6 months ago, and I thought it was fine. So, hopefully there's not too many goons out there that are watching 2.5 hour speaker design presentations.
Exactly. Exactly.
You-
Wow. I think we've covered all the questions. I feel terrible if I've missed somebody. So now is your chance to raise your hand while Perry's still here.
Do you show at Axpona or other audio shows?
No, and one of the comments that people have made is, "Oh my goodness, like I can't believe you're putting like a $200,000 speaker design for free on the internet." It's like, well, that's because I don't want to be in the speaker business. I mean, if somebody else in the speaker business wants to license or something like that, I'm perfectly open to that. But I've drawn a clear line between, I'm an entrepreneur and I've started a lot of companies, and I just drawn a line between my hobby fun time and my profession. I don't want to be in the speaker profession. I did that for 3 years and it was fine. But that's just not what I do. I do occasionally sell these. I have and if you want to contact me about purchasing one of these, you're welcome to. I have a different dipole design that that is installed at Berwyn Recording Studio here, not too far from where I live, and they're the main control monitors in a recording studio. So, I'm open to those kind of things, but I've not made it into a business.
Thank you for not, because that would spoil it for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's brilliant.
I really enjoy interacting with all the people on the forums and answering the questions and watching people go make stuff. And like when I showed you some of those other designs where they did it their way, they were gorgeous. Like I love that's one of the great things about the DIY community. And like, they weren't just guys that slapped it together with some plywood. Like, they did really fine work, and it's furniture quality. And they have world-class speakers that can compete with YG Acoustics and Estelon and Focal and B&W and Kef, and name PS Audio, or like name your high-end brand. I think it's great that like independent guys with some elbow grease can do stuff like this and get world-class results.
Fantastic. Well, it fills my heart with hope. Maybe that would conclude our session. One last chance to raise your hand.
Can I just make one more comment?
Yeah,
I do these little listening parties and I call them bourbon night. And you saw a picture of one of those at a hotel. but I've done them here at my house too. And I'll have just regular people over and I'll say, come over to my house. And we're going to drink bourbon and listen to music. And you have never heard anything like this in your life. And the average civilian who's not an audiophile that doesn't go to Axpona, they'll be like, oh my word, that was amazing. I hate my soundbar.
Well, that's what it's all about. And you know, I guess I've lived long enough to remember when this kind of reaction to stereo was more commonplace. I think because you had more shops that had systems that would do that to you, and you
Yeah.
had no idea what you were missing. Or you go to somebody's house who was showing that off, and it's a little out of fashion maybe, but the effect never goes away.
Well, I tell people, I say, most people don't realize that recording engineers, think of your favorite recordings from Steely Dan or whatever. They slaved over those recordings for months and they obsessed over every little sound and every EQ. And the person on the subway with their iPod, their earbuds, they missed 90% of that stuff. And when you experienced the original event, on a really good system, the way it was meant to be heard. Like, Miles Davis isn't alive anymore. The only way to hear him is through a recording. And the only way to really enjoy Miles Davis is through a kick-ass set of speakers that are super accurate and reveal every detail. And guess what? It is a religious experience. And it does take you out of yourself.
And we're so lucky now with these digital components that you've integrated. They're not expensive. It's and it radically changes the situation to be able to build it. So
I saw Alvin's hand was up.
Yeah, it is. So Alvin, you had a question. Hello, Alvin. Oh no, it looks like he's frozen. He was very patient.
So this is John Hilgers again. I threw my email in the whatever you call it, if somebody wants to listen to them south of Milwaukee.
Well, thank you for that. That's very nice.
In the chat.
In the chat window.
It's in the chat, yes.
We'll save the chat as part of our notes for the meeting, and we'll put it in the BASS and all of that. And then this will come up on the YouTube channel shortly after we edit it. I wanted to give Alvin a chance to reconnect. I feel bad because he was very patient with his hand raised. His physical hand at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm afraid he's gone.
Well, you guys have been a great audience.
Well, it's been absolutely terrific.
And if you have questions, ask them on the DIY audio forum. That's the best place. People do post questions in my personal website, but I always refer them to the forum because then multiple people can see the answer and it spreads out to the community. So the DIY audio forum is great, and very serious people do very serious work there. So it's a fun community.
Well, thank you, Perry. Thank you, Nelson and John, who also came to talk about your experience and our guests and all the members. Fantastic session. All right. So with that, we will formally close, and I'll see you next month. Thank you.